So, ladies and gentlemen, dear attendees, I just we are now starting for the session one. The session one is called about fire and disaster prevention, but it's more focused on economic issues, and I'm very keen on that, as you may know, because I also have some acquaintance of this word of giving value to the civil protection action. So I would like to introduce now Eric Saylors. Eric Saylors is a member of Sacramento Fire Department, USA, and also the paper he will present us is extract from a thesis, if I well understand, Eric, thesis on evaluating the value, the added value of the fire departments all over the world, but probably more in USA, and how to compare the value saved by the fire departments in regards of the risk estimation, and how to promote the economic impact of the fire departments. So, Eric, the floor is yours, and we are very interested in your talk.
Thank you very much. I'll start sharing my screen now. So this is going to be a brief introduction to a paper that was published in 2015, and it starts with asking the first question is the greatest value of the fire service is the event that didn't happen. Right? So how do you prove a negative? How do you prove something that didn't happen? And then how can you quantify that negative, since the title of it, quantifying the negative, right? And it is a post-incident assessment model looking backwards at an incident that has already happened based on urban fire suppression. When you publish in an academic journal, you have to scope your study very narrowly, and this was on urban fire suppression, but this model has been expanded to almost all domains of emergency management now, from wildland fires to TSA to terrorism. So starting with the initial problem statement, this was what I'll call started off as an 8-year project for me, is now turning into a 15-year project for me as I'm going and do my dissertation. I asked, what is the value of a fire service? I've been in the fire service for 26 years now. And as I look down this row of fire engines waiting to attack this large warehouse fire, realizing each one of these engines in American dollars is somewhere between $500,000 to $1 million just for the piece of equipment. And each person on it costs roughly $150,000 to $200,000 a year. And each rig comes with 4 people on it. So this is a massive investment. Typically in America, it's somewhere around 25% of the local government's budget just to maintain a fire department like this. And my initial background is in finance. I was a stockbroker and an analyst for Mutual of New York. And I started asking this question, can I calculate a return on value on something that prevents things from happening? So the theoretical framework for this model is bound in network theory. When I looked at the fire department and what it does, I realized we tend to only study the things that are lost. We'll know everything about the building that burned down. We know when we got there, how many people were there, when the building was built. We've got details galore on the building that burned, but we frequently miss the buildings that were exposed. And those are the things that we actually save. So network theory is made up of a basic tenets of links, nodes, degrees, that's how connected the network is, and the density, how dense this network is. To apply this, what I ultimately wanted to get to is to be able to look at a fire like this and not only recognize the building that burned and what was potentially lost, but to also recognize the buildings that were exposed that the fire department saved, and then put some sort of number on it in a scientifically validated, reproducible methodology that can be used over and over again. Now, the conceptual framework of looking at the value of those structures came in 2 pieces. First, the tangible value of the structure, which I use something called inductive replacement cost approach. That's the assessment of how much would it cost to rebuild that building. We don't save land, so I don't bring in land into it. Market value is not a fair assessment of it. So you really got to look at how much does it cost to replace that building? There are a few pieces of software in America that are standard for almost all insurance companies. I used one of them called 360 Value by Versix, and that gives a very nice validated replacement cost on all structures. Once you get the details of structures, you can plug it through the software and you get back a validated number. There's another side to this story, though, and that's not necessarily the tangible value of the building, but the intangible things that happen inside the building, especially if it's a business. And I wanted to know, what is the economic impact of that business, whether it's a restaurant or a large commercial warehouse, and the ripple effect through the economy, because you lose one business in an economy, it actually affects multiple businesses around it. So for that, I use economic impact modeling. In America, there are two major companies that do that. One is called Implan, the other one is Remy. I used Implan, and it truly measures that economic impact of removing businesses or adding them to regional economies to get numbers back. And if you shut down a business like a coffee shop, it will include the deliveries that come to it, the delivery drivers, all the way down to the mechanics that actually work on the trucks that deliver the food. So it really goes through the regional economic impact. So we'll look at a few case studies here. The first case study is a multi-commercial structure that started in the center part of the structure and then spread to all of the exposures. This is the simple network. And when we're looking at this simple value, what I got back when using this model was the tangible value of the structure was about $1.9 million. The intangible value of all the businesses was about $7.6 million. So sitting in that structure is about $9.6 million. Well, there was $70,000 worth of damage, which means that we saved about $9.6 million and about an hour's worth of work. What this allowed me to do is then calculate an S ratio. This is a fascinating tool to measure what was actually saved on this fire as compared to what was at risk. So a score on this fire is 99%, which allows me to compare our performance to other fires and compare ourselves to other agencies that may use different response models. So we'll look at the next case study, which will kind of elaborate that. This is a multi-building fire where we lost an entire warehouse that ran the entire block, this one in red, and it spread to the neighboring warehouse, which then spread to another large commercial building. It also spread to a neighboring house. This is the network theory that maps that fire out. That large warehouse is still a parking lot because it burned all the way to the ground, but the fire department worked very hard to save all the exposure buildings. It was like a 6-hour fire. Well, if you add up the value of all those buildings, it was about $3 million. You add up all the businesses in all those buildings, it was about $3.2 million. So the total value of this fire was sitting at about $6.2 million. Well, one of the buildings went all the way to the ground. So the loss was almost $1 million, which put our save at $5.2 million and a save ratio of 84%. This was telling for us because we tend to talk about the large fires and forget about the small fires, but the small fires are the ones we technically do better on because our S ratio is so much higher. So after 1 year study on an urban fire department, this is the conclusions. The total value saved was in 1 year about $19 million. We saved about $4 million per building. We had 451 fires that year. So our annual save was about $2 billion. And our budget was $96 million, which gave us an ROI of 2,200%. So that was 1 year of the fire department, a return on investment of over 2,000%. That was the original study in 2014 to 2015. Since then, it's been applied to other cities, and this is a fascinating test right here. I'll call it the A/B test because it ran in 2 different cities that were neighboring each other. They were about the same size, 26 square miles, similar population density, same number of fire stations. The only difference is that one fire department had 1 extra firefighter on each rig. And they ran this study for multiple years to see what type of averages they got. Well, they mapped it out exactly like I did. This was not a study done by me. This is somebody that took my published work and applied it in the exact same way. They looked at every fire they had. This is actually a screenshot of the report that they finished. And here are the numbers they got, which is very telling between City A and City B. City A is the fire department that had one less firefighter on each rig versus City B. And when you work your way down to the bottom, you will see that City A had an average S ratio of 66%. So they roughly saved 66% of everything that was at risk, whereas City B had an average S ratio of 93%. When you look at their total value saved, City A at a little over $5 million, City B at $16 million. And in their final conclusion of return on investment, City A, with one less firefighter, their ROI was 126%, whereas City B, with that extra firefighter, was 225%. So this was a great tool for city management and politicians that didn't quite understand what the fire service did as far as suppression and what it meant in a dollar amount. This report actually went to both city managers for these two cities so they could look and assess what it was to actually support their fire department. Now, after this report, they brought it back to me. I hadn't seen it until they were done. We extrapolated out some numbers to figure out what the value of that additional firefighter was. And after breaking down the cost of what each firefighter costs, and then the difference in the value, we got a number back at about $600,000. So the cost for the firefighters in those cities was about $150,000 a year. They returned about $600,000 every year for that additional firefighter, which was a fantastic tool for city management to understand where to invest money for the community so that they can reduce their losses. When looking at this and looking back at the years of studies, one of the recommendations I can say is that we frequently misframe problems. We have to be careful how we frame our problems. And this is an example of the American Fire Service misframing a problem. What it is doing here in this chart is it is putting medical aids on the same graph as fires. Fires are the red line, medical aids are the blue line. And the problem with this is that if you are an uninformed observer, you think that your true risk lies in medical aids simply because of the frequency of events. But anybody who is a classical quant or understands analytics knows that fires follow a power law, and the medical aids follow a Gaussian distribution or a bell curve. That's truly not risk in that blue line. That is simply a predictable event. The real risk is down in the red line in those fires that follow a power law, because if one of them gets out of control, it can change the history of the city. And I've noticed this in the American Fire Service for many years, is we are still mixing these two events together. And when I look at other departments of Homeland Security in America, they're doing the same thing. So my recommendations are be very careful about when you're framing things and separate things that have the potential to self-replicate from the things that follow a normal distribution. And I will end with this simple framework, looking back on this study as a suggestion of ontological and epistemological views of when looking at risk. Starting with asking the first question when looking at risk is, what can we know? Well, the question is does this potential risk have the ability to self-replicate? That's a yes or no question. If the answer is no, then it's probably a simple event that is independent, and we can apply linear thinking, and our tools are statistics and probability. They're very useful in independent events that are in linear analytical thinking. That's our epistemological view. But if these events like fires or cancer or pandemics or social media posts have the potential to self-replicate, well, then you are dealing with a complex event ontologically. That means it is typically connected to everything in the system. And at that point, holistic thinking or systems thinking has to come into play. And a very useful tool for that is network theory. And network theory will help map out that potentiality of events that self-replicate. So that is a very brief introduction to quantifying the negative, how Homeland Security adds value. This was published in 2015. As you can see, multiple publications have come after it. Like I said, it turned into an 8-year project and is rapidly turning into a 15-year project for me. I have a master's in Homeland Security, and I am currently working on my doctorate in leadership. If you want to reach out to me or you have any questions, follow up on this presentation, feel free to reach out to me. Here is my email at USC. So thank you very much. I can upload this PowerPoint and give you all of my references.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you very much, respecting so strictly the timeline and giving additional time for the question at the end of the session. Thank you very much. Oh, okay. I switch to the next speaker, maybe to the person who was scheduled at the end of the not at the end of the session, of course. Fahmida Saadia Rahman. Good morning, Fahmida.
Yeah, good morning. So here it's night.
So
I'm in
now,
Australia.
let's
Talking to you from Australia, and we are 10 hours ahead. So it's fine. Good morning.
I would have liked to introduce you as well as possible, because you are now promoting a large statistic review on some fatalities and injuries during structure fires. And what is interesting, of course, is to see the losses impact and in deduction, what is the interest of giving a real protection in prevention and in operation in these two big important things to decrease, of course, the losses. So Fahmida, the floor is yours. You have 20 minutes to present your paper.
Hello, everyone. I'm Fahmida, a PhD student from Discipline of Economics, Finance and Property, School of Business at Western Sydney University from Sydney, Australia. I would like to give a quick introduction of my co-authors. Among the co-authors, Tannous is my principal supervisor. Lara, Harvey, Gulay, Avsar, and Kingsley, Agho are my co-supervisors. Kathy and Gulay are from School of Business at Western Sydney University. Kingsley is from School of Health Science at Western Sydney University. Lara is from Neuroscience Research Australia, which is an independent medical research institute based in Sydney, Australia. Nargess is my fellow mate and a PhD candidate from School of Business at Western Sydney University. A second reviewer is required for conducting some parts of a systematic review. I have chosen Nargess as a second reviewer for good reasons. Nargess and I are doing our PhD on residential fire under the supervision of the same supervisory panel. She has been working on quantifying the health impacts and health service utilization costs of residential fires, while my area is the estimation of the economic costs of residential fire from a societal perspective. I have been working in close supervision with Lara for the purpose of systematic review. This is the brief introduction of the authors of this systematic review. So the title of today's presentation is Global Economic Costs of Residential Fire, a Systematic Review. This is a part of the literature review of my PhD thesis. Let's move forward to the presentation. This presentation will start with background, followed by objective, method, result, and finally we'll end up with outcome. Globally, fire is one of the leading causes of deaths and disabilities, and fire-related burns are the fourth most common source of unintentional trauma. Each year, there are an estimated 300,000 deaths and millions are left with lifelong disabilities due to fire. In both low and middle-income countries and industrialist countries, majority of fire-related deaths and injuries occur in residential areas. Low and middle-income countries are commonly considered more vulnerable to fire-related injuries and fatalities. Over 96% of all fatal fire-related burns occur in these countries. The study has found very limited literature on low and middle-income countries discussing about the fire issue along with associated injury or death and property damage. A study conducted on Asian countries revealed that fire becomes a serious threat for urban settlement nowadays. In China, a total of around 132,000 fires were reported, with 1,200 deaths and 20 billion Chinese currency in direct property losses in 2010. Fire is also a regular problem in homes, workplaces, hospitals, and public places in India. The risk of fire is ranked 5th in India, and almost 25,000 fatalities are occurring every year due to fire and related causes. The study has not come across any literature conducted in low and middle-income countries on residential fire and the costs of residential fire. Along with low and middle-income countries, fire is highly relevant in high-income countries as well. According to the National Fire Protection Association, in the United States, 28% of all fires occurred in home structure. That results 77% of all fire deaths, 77% of all fire injuries, and 54% of all property loss due to fire in 2019. In Canada, a total of around 145,000 residential fires were reported between 2005 and 2015 for the provinces of British Columbia, Alberta, Manitoba, and Ontario. Of fire-related casualties, around 86% were minor and major injuries and almost 14% death. In England, there were more than 27,000 dwelling fires and approximately 25,000 accidental dwelling fires with 176 fire-related fatalities and 5,000 non-fatal casualties in 2020. In Sweden, residential fires account for 3/4 of all fire-related fatalities and cause approximately 100 deaths per year. If we look at Australia, in 2018, residential fire resulted 87 fire-related deaths. That means more than 1 death per week, and an estimated 3,500 hospitalizations due to fire-related injuries. Most of the statistics regarding fire and residential fire reported today are from the government sources or various institutional reports or news reports. Residential fire has still been neglected. In terms of residential fire and the estimation of the cost of residential fires, there is a limited number of studies conducted in Australia and internationally. I would like to give an idea about the literature that we have got on the cost of residential fire. The study has found only 4 literature working on costs of fire, of which only 2 are published journal articles. Zhang et al. Estimated the total cost of fire in the United States that was $329 billion, which was 2% of the country's GDP in 2014. They also estimated costs of injuries and deaths, property loss, indirect losses, and cost of fire insurance. Lawrence et al. Assessed the total loss to society due to residential fire injuries, which was $19 billion in the United States. They also assessed loss of productivity and quality of life, medical costs for both fatal and non-fatal residential fire injuries. Ash et al. Reported total cost of fire in Australia was $12 billion, that was 1.3% of the country's total GDP for 2005. They further reported cost of injury, property damage, business loss, cost of insurance administration, and loss for heritage and culture. Moreover, they reported the cost of fire-related injury in New South Wales in Australia, which was $75 million in 2005. Tannous et al. Estimated a cost of $656 million per year for residential structural fires in urban and regional New South Wales in Australia during 2009 and 2030. They further estimated structural damage, productivity loss, costs of fatalities, and insurance claim. The reported cost figures are mainly direct costs. The economic cost of residential fire from a societal perspective has not been researched for Australia and more broadly internationally. Studies to date have not measured the costs of fire for bystanders, carriers, businesses, and government, and as well as the cost of fire service, police, ambulance, health service, and other emergency services related to fire. It is well recognized that the reported number of residential fires and the related injuries or deaths and the costs of residential fires significantly underestimates the true burden. This study aims to provide a systematic review of the economic cost of residential fire from a societal perspective, which includes individuals, economic costs for response agencies, health service costs, other businesses, and government agents. I'm going to describe each of the components in detail in next section. I have been going through several steps to conduct the systematic review so far. For instance, preparing a protocol, developing search strategy, conducting search on the databases and gray literature, and developing a risk of bias tool. Systematic review is a review of a clearly formulated question that was systematic and reproducible methods to identify, select, and critically appraise all relevant research, and to collect and analyze data from the studies that are included in the review. The systematic review protocol provides insight of the scope and parameters for the systematic review to be carried out. The protocol has been registered with Prospero, which is the International Prospective Register of Systematic Reviews. The reference number is showing on the screen. Now I would like to explain the eligibility criteria. To formulate our systematic review question and guide our literature search strategy, and to identify relevant studies for review, we selected specific inclusion and exclusion criteria using the PEO framework, where P stands for population, E exposure, and O outcomes. Population consists of all populations and response agencies who have experienced a residential fire and fire-related injury and death. The population is classified into three broader stakeholders, which are individual, business, and government. Individual is further categorized into three components. First, individual, who are directly affected by the residential fire. Second, bystander, who are neighbors and are present around the place where and when the fire incidents took place. And third, carer, who takes care of the fire-affected people. Business initially is divided into two categories, directly related and indirectly related to fire. Directly related businesses are the first responder, which are fire service, ambulance, police, and state emergency service, and acute care health service, which includes emergency department, hospital, inpatient, and outpatient clinic care. Indirectly related businesses are utility providers like gas, electricity, and water, insurance companies like general and health insurance, life insurance, and other offices and employers. Lastly, government comes to broader society. Residential fire is the exposure here. The outcome of the systematic review is to generate a current synthesis of relevant studies on the total societal economic cost associated with the residential fires and the fire-related injuries. The review addresses the selected studies' ability to assess the treatment cost, loss productivity, income, and quality of life for individual, the cost of each of the response agencies, health service costs, the cost of other businesses like the utility providers, insurance companies, and loss of productivity or outcome of the employers, cost to the government in terms of the loss of tax revenue, cost of welfare payment, cost of funding to response agencies and health service, cost of other supports to the society. The review will consider all articles, official reports published in peer-reviewed journals and in gray literature with focus on economic or societal cost or burden of residential fires, cost or burden of injuries or deaths from fire, cost or burden to individual bystanders carers, cost of response agencies to fires, cost or burden of business agents, loss of productivity or output of employers, loss of structural property, and cost or burden of the government to fires. The review will exclude studies outside of the years ranging from January 1978 to December 2020. Moreover, studies published in languages other than English and non-peer-reviewed will also be excluded. The search strategy is designed with the help of a librarian and my supervisors to be as extensive as possible to identify all eligible studies, which will subsequently be refined according to the eligibility criteria. We divided the search terms into 5 groups: residential, fire, injury, death, and cost. 5 databases, Medline, Embas, Econlit, Sinner, and Scoopus, were searched using a variety of subheadings and free text terms. Search on the databases as well as query literature was conducted considering the year limited from 1st January 1978 to 31st December 2020. The starting date of 1978 was chosen as it coincides with the introduction of the first legislation mandating the installation of smoke alarm in all residences in Montgomery County from Maryland in the United States. EndNote software was used to manage the search results. The selection of studies for inclusion in the review was a 2-step process using Confidence software. In step 1, 2 reviewers independently reviewed the study titles and abstracts to identify all potentially eligible studies meeting the inclusion criteria. Consultations with a third reviewer resolved disagreements in step 1. In step 2, 2 reviewers independently assessed the full text of all the identified potentially eligible studies to determine which studies will be included in the review. 2 reviewers will independently assess the quality of the included studies using a customized risk of bias tool, which is appropriate to serve the purpose of the research question. We have already developed our customized risk of bias tool. The reason for developing a customized risk of bias tool is that none of the existing tools individually could serve the purpose of this review. Our study is a non-randomized cohort study. Our customized risk of bias tool followed the approach of designing a risk of bias tool described by Wangzhe et al. In their study titled Tools for Assessing Methodological Quality of Human Observational Studies, published in 2019. The review has taken the concept of 9 domains along with the types of relevant questions described in Wangzhe et al. Study. The domains are given on the slide, and the relevant questions for each domain selected are on the screen now. Based on the questions, the quality of the selected studies will be assessed. The review found that 5 existing tools, which are CAST, SIGN, NICE, JBI, and Newcastle OTA scale, were good to serve our purpose, but none of them alone could assess all the required questions chosen for each of the domains. Therefore, we combined all the 5 tools to get a customized risk of bias tool, which will provide a better assessment for the selected studies for our research question. Here is the review result. Initially, we got 6,381 studies. Then after deduplication, we merged all the results using EndNote. And then after deduplication, the number of studies dropped down to 5,392. And finally, 4,392 studies were left on Providence for reviewing the title and abstract. Meanwhile, Nargess and I are already done with screening the title and abstract of 3,493 studies on Providence, and finally determined 27 studies relevant for full text review after the consultation with Lara as a disagreements resolver. And currently, Lara and I have been reviewing the full text on software Providence. Moreover, we have also started searching for Gray literature. We are looking for published reports from Fire Service Department, Health Service Department, Bureau of Statistics, other government and non-government institutions, and international organizations. The systematic review is currently ongoing. The expected outcome from this proper systematic review will be the most comprehensive to date, as it aims to identify, assess, and synthesize all of the published English language studies on the societal economic cost, residential fire, and associated injury and death. The findings will provide the most comprehensive evidence to date on the societal economic cost of residential fire to individual business agents and government. The findings will be important for different stakeholders in policy and planning processes. I'm thankful to Fire and Rescue New South Wales and Western Sydney University. Also thankful to my supervisory panel, Graduate Research School, School of Business, School of Health Science, 2 librarians, Lily Collison and Paul Jewell, and my fellow PhD students from Western Sydney University. Last but not least, Neuroscience Research Australia. I'm also grateful to the Conference Authority for giving me a chance to present my work. And this is all for today.
Thank you. So thank you very much, Fahmida. I would like to know if Dave Waterhouse is not yet in the meeting. So we have a concern with a Canadian connection. But however, I open the floor for 10 minutes for those who have some questions. I may have some question in a Q&A. Fahmida, congratulations from Rahman. It's not a question, it's a congrats from Rahman Tannous for you, Fahmida.
Thank you so much.
And thanks to the University of New South Wales, because it's a very famous province, also in France because of the Wi-Fi. Fahmida, a question to you. When you express all the losses, especially including the fatalities, which kind of model do you use to estimate the value of a life, lost life?
Actually, when we are, our plan is to use a linked administrative data. So this is my first year going on my PhD study. I haven't seen the data set yet, but I know it's a linked administrative data. So we have data from the fire service, we have hospital data, and birth and death registry data. And so there are nine stakeholders, and we have the data from the 9 stakeholders. We are going to link and merge the data to get the exact number of incidents and number of fatalities, injuries, and other stuffs. And we try to form a model so that we can just estimate the total economic cost. Because so far we know just the hospital, they have their report. That means this is the injury cost or hospital cost. Similarly, but we don't know actually what is the total economic costs, including the time loss of the individual who are directly affected, those who are carer, who takes care of the fire affected people. So their time of that valuation, so the opportunity cost of the time of from their work. So at the same time, the individual who is affected, they are the employee of the employer. So what is the output loss of the employer when their staffs are affected by the fire? So from this perspective, the cost amount is not measured so far. Similarly, what is the time cost of the fire service when they attend the fire? And the police.
Yes. But you are too scientific for me, but my question was very more obvious because when we use some values of life to estimate the saved value of a saved life, we have some heterogeneous database. For example, in Europe, if we base our calculation on OECD values, we estimate the average life value on 3 million euro. Okay, and Dave Waterhouse, which is not here, in United States and Canada, used the number of $7 million. So it would be interesting to compare with some values in Australia, to have this global views, this global picture, to know if we save a life, or if we lost a life, what is the lost value or what is the saved value? Because there is some discrepancy, you know, in the different publications. So it would be interesting to have this, at first, this small survey to review, to say in different continents, there is an appreciation, a different appreciation of the value of the life. That's the first step, maybe.
Yeah, this is the first step. And currently, if you ask me what's the method or what is the model, so I showed a flow chart. So tentatively, that is the plan to do in my PhD, which components we are going to consider to measure the cost, but specific measurement or statistics haven't decided yet actually. So the initial step is just to do the systematic review as this type of, the cost factors of what is the cost of residential fire that is not actually well reported. So better to go through the literature properly, whether we do not miss any literature, and try to do a systematic review. Then our plan is to estimate the cost.
Yes, the review is a fundament because it's also very important to build on this large survey and review. But what I know that your professor is Tannous, is it?
Yeah.
So she's taking part to these thinking groups on economic value. So that will be interesting, and I'm sure that we will have this connection point on the comparison, transnational, transcontinental values. That's interesting. So thank you very much. I'm a little bit sad not having Eric because it's very early in America. Maybe he's now going to his job. It's possible. I check if there is other questions or not. And I will probably close this session now a little bit earlier as foreseen because the lack of the speaker. But I propose to have now the closure of the first session. Maybe Fahmida, if you want to add something very shortly, it's also possible. But this conference has not to move in a discussion between two of us. So if you agree, I will close the first session, wishing you a nice lunch time, and we will see us again at 2 p.m. CET, of course, for the session 2 on the lesson learned. And thank you to all of us, speakers, attendees and directors of TIEMS. Thank you very much. And we see us in 90 minutes, let's say 90 minutes, around 90 minutes. Thank you, Fahmida. Thank you, Eric. And thank you, Dave. And see you soon.